much of it because I want you to have a Shabbat Shalom. So I'm just going to do a little bit of it, but you'll know it. It goes like this. Na 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 na. Right? Yes. Good. Yes. Good. What is that? Oh, I sang it decently. You got it. It wasn't good. You didn't say like, I don't know. Row, row, row your boat. Good. So the tune was in the vicinity. So it's pomp and circumstance, which if you think of it, what do you think of automatically? Graduation. Right. Okay. So it's an instant. Right. You hear that tune, you think graduation. You think walking down some aisle with some uncomfortable sort of robe with a hat that's sort of falling. The tassel, maybe not the tassel, the switch, sort of that whole sort of really great moment. And so pomp and circumstance, this great sort of moment of our graduation, of us fulfilling this wonderful achievement that we've working so hard for, and we get to stand there with this piece of cardboard square in our head, with something flapping in our face, in our mouth, and wandering along, shaking hands with someone who doesn't really know you, but you hand them a card and they make it sound like that. It's a really beautiful moment. It's really deep and meaningful. But it's this sort of transitional moment. It's really lovely. And so Pomp and Circumstance, by the way, I don't know if you know this, was written by a guy named Sir Edward Elgar. And he composed it, and it actually, he was inspired by Othello, from Shakespeare's Othello, and he took it from one of the lines in Othello: "Pride, pomp, and circumstance of glorious war." And he wrote it in 1901, but it wasn't intended for graduations. It was originally intended. It was actually used in the coronation for King Edward VII. So, right? You remember that? You remember that, right? We talked about, right? You knew this. It was like, of course, no. So, just so you know, it first became associated with the graduation in 1905 when it was played when Elgar received an honorary doctorate from Yale. And so at Yale, they were like, wow, that's an interesting tune to use for graduations. And so then it became, it transferred next to Princeton, next to the University of Chicago, then to Columbia, and that was it. Thus was born to playing this tune when we graduate, when we reach this pinnacle in our lives, and we've moved through this sort of challenging time of study. Our completion is there with pomp and circumstance. And so the Torah portion this week, Vayechi, which is the last Torah portion in the book of Genesis, so we conclude Genesis this week, is really about endings. Not only does it make sense that it's the last Torah portion of the book of Genesis, because it's the end of the book of Genesis, but the whole thing really talks about endings, about these big endings. And so Jacob realizes that his life is ending, right? We know Jacob. We've heard of him. Yes, good. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Good. Okay, just you're with me. Excellent. So Jacob is about to die. If you've been following the story of the brothers, it's been 4 Torah portions worth of the stories of Joseph, who is one of Jacob's kids, and his brothers. There are 13 siblings in total, 12 boys, 1 girl, poor kid. And so it's the conclusion of the story of the brothers, and is the conclusion of the book of Genesis. And so he speaks to his kids. It's sort of on his deathbed. Jacob speaks to all of his kids. They're all sitting around him, and he sort of blesses them. But if you look at the text really closely, they're not necessarily all blessings. Some are blessings, some are compliments, others are some chastisements. He calls them mighty and strong. He calls them judgy, and he calls them instruments of cruelty to some of them, actually. He calls them, one of them he refers to as a serpent. The other he refers to as a ravenous wolf. And so it's sort of a blessing / not so much a blessing, but this is what he does sort of at the end of his life for his kids. If I would have figured out how to turn on the little light bulbs that light up the stained glass around here, which I did not figure out how to do this afternoon, you would see the 12 tribes beautifully illuminated around me right now. Just with your good imagination, pretend they're illuminated and the lucent colors are flowing at you, and or trust me that they're there. I've only been here at the congregation for close to 12 years, and so I feel like I have not achieved the information of where that switch is. But soon, perhaps, in the next 12 years, perhaps I will figure out where that one switch eludes me. Every other light is on, except for the one I needed for this one moment to share with you right now. But I'm okay with it. So at the moment that Jacob is sort of coming to the end of his life, he blesses his children, and then there's this very interesting line. It says, and then when Jacob finished commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into bed and expired, and he was gathered to his people. This is the piece of text that follows the blessings that he gives to his kids. And so what's interesting, though, is it says, and he, Jacob, expired, and he was gathered to his people. But vaigva, which is the word that's used in the text for expired, is actually the word expired. It doesn't say that he dies. Actually, nowhere does it say that he actually dies. And the Talmud then picks up the fact that the word does not say die and suggests that perhaps Jacob never died. So go with me on this ride, if you will. And that this is from Talmud, and so then it goes into some mystical thinking. And so that it doesn't say that he died, and so they think he doesn't die. And so when the rabbis say that he didn't die, the commentary says that we should learn from this that there are really no endings. There are no such thing as endings, actually. When we look at our lives, there are actually very few real endings. If we think about our relationships between friends and family and partners, they truly never end. Perhaps they're complicated, but perhaps they're fabulous. Perhaps the rides are rough or bumpy or perfect and smooth flowing, but they don't truly end. The experiences we share with them, the impact they make on us, we always sort of carry that. And when we complete a part of our education, be it the high school or the college with the tassel and the graduate programs, they're not really endings. The educational culmination is merely the preparation for the next challenge, the next job, the next step in our lives. Right? When you're standing there in your college graduation and you're thinking, I need a job, there's a new start there. It's sort of not an actual official ending. And so when we finish a book of Torah, when we finish any book actually, and we loved it or we're challenged by it, we might think about it for years afterwards. So even though we finish the book, let's say, the book impacts us because it influences how we read another book or how we see a movie or how we interact with someone else, because it impacts us that way. And just because we close the book, it doesn't mean it stops to influence us. And so we might say that death is the only thing truly resembling an ending. However, as Jews, that is not necessarily our perspective, because for those who die, we always carry their memories with us, and they always guide us, and they always teach us, and they remain with us even past this concept of death. And so at the conclusion of each book of the Torah, which we are doing right now, we recite Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, which means strength, strength, and may we be strengthened. And so the last portion of this book of Genesis provides us with a lesson of how we should respond to those many perceived endings in our lives. It is a description and a command, actually, that we should feel strengthened from our experience, and we should be strong in order to return again, because we know that we will be returning to this book of Genesis when the cycle is complete, when we go to Exodus and then Leviticus, and they'll all come back to this spot. And so it's the last Torah portion of the book of Genesis. It's the last Torah portion that we get to share together in the year 2015, because the next time we will sit together on Shabbat will be 2016. And so when we look at endings, the complexity that they bring up, the finality that they appear to play in our lives, we should remember that they are not real endings. That moment with the tassel perhaps isn't the real ending. When we hear the words of pomp and circumstance, they are always with us, empowering us and teaching us, and always available for us to reflect on and review. And so as we conclude this book of Torah and move into our new secular year, I invite all of us to have a lovely Shabbat and strength where we should all be strengthened. Shabbat Shalom.